It's a new week here in the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern. Oh my gosh, all over the world on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, iHeartRadio, Xena Media, Simul Radio, and Simul TV at www.simultv.com, and the X Zone TV channel is Channel 21. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And for the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. X Zone Nation, my guest this hour is Mike CLELLAND, and Mike's 2015 book, The Messengers, was met with high praise. In it, he explores the mysterious connection between owls, synchronicities, and UFO abduction. It was his first-hand experience with these elusive events that have been the foundation for his research. This book is also a personal memoir and a journey of self-discovery. His website, hiddenexperience.blogspot.com, explores these events and their connection to the alien contact phenomenon. It also features extended audio interviews with visionaries and experts examining the complexities of the overall UFO experience. Mike is also considered an expert in the skills of ultralight backpacking and is the author and illustrator of a series of instructional books on advanced outdoor techniques. After 25 years of living in the Rockies, he now lives in the Adirondacks. And joining me now is Mike CLELLAND. And Mike, welcome to the X Zone. Mike,
thank you so much. I'm right here.
Oh,
Sorry about that. You know what I did is I put myself on mute just so you would have a nice, perfect silence and you wouldn't hear me breathing or my chair squeaking in the background.
Oh, sure. So that's it. Spoil all the fun.
I'm delighted to be here. So hope I didn't make you panic there.
No. I'm kind of used to these things after 29 years of doing the show, but it's always great to have a guest come on and say, I'm here. First of all, welcome to the X Zone. Great talking to you. And what part of the Adirondacks do you live in?
Right near Lake Placid, so I'm very close to the Canadian border. So
beautiful place. Beautiful
the closest big city is Montreal. Yeah.
Yeah. I grew up on the south shore of Montreal. About it was about a 45-minute drive to the border at Plattsburgh, Rouse's Point.
But I'm right near Plattsburgh. Yeah, I take the ferry all the time over to Burlington, Vermont.
That's right.
Plus Lake Champlain. I've yet to see Champy. I keep a watchful eye, but I've yet to see her.
So how did you get in? Tell me about this connection between owls, synchronicities, and UFOs. Now, I've been doing the show a long time, and I've never heard a connection with an owl.
So I'm 56 now, and turn the clock back, I think it's about 12 years. I would have been, I think it's almost 13 years now. It was in 2006. I was living in Idaho, right near the Grand Teton National Park. It was a beautiful spot. I lived in this amazing place, and I would go camping for one night. At the time, I was working for an outdoor school, and there was this woman working at the school, and I said, hey, let's go camping. And she said, sure.
Oh, that's a great pickup line. Let's go camping.
Well, that's a kind of town. It's like the kind of thing, I guess, if you live in Malibu, you can say, hey, let's go surfing. Or if you live in New York City, you can say, hey, let's go to this fancy restaurant. But yeah, where I lived, it was, let's go camping. So
up here where I live, it's, let's go to my place.
Yeah, so we have to. So anyway, it wasn't really truly a date. So It was more just it was a complete stranger, though. Mm-hmm. Her name is Kristen, and we went camping for one night. The weather forecast was perfect, so there's no reason to bring a tent. We just slept out under the stars. Mm-hmm. So we walked in with very light packs.
Right.
And sun was setting. You walk in the afternoon, you can get pretty deep in the mountains in a few hours, and we were in this absolutely gorgeous point right in the Tetons, and the sun was setting, and she said something, and it took me, and I was like, wow, this is a really impressive person. Like, I didn't expect this. It was a complete stranger, and she said something that struck me.
What was that?
we'll get to that in a second to tell this. So but at that moment, she said something.
Mm-hmm.
An owl flew over us, and then a second owl, and then a third owl. And for the next, 2 hours, these owls flew around us and above us as the sun was setting. We ate and laid our sleeping bags out under the stars, and literally we were laying down looking up at the stars, and there was just for 1/2 a second, just a microsecond, the skies would be blotted, the star would be blotted out above us. And it was really magical. Now, owls are very quiet in flight. I mean, they were flying right over our faces and blotting out the stars. It was so magical. So we got up the next morning and hiked out. It was a wonderful hike. We were back before lunch, back to town. And I said, hey, let's do this again. And she said, sure. So 4 days later, we went camping again. At sunset, we were watching the sunset, and an owl landed near us. This was a completely different part of the mountains. An owl landed near us. Another one flew above us. And then one landed at our feet. And before, they were kind of kept their distance. Not this second time. They were right there next to us, landing at our feet. And I've done a lot of outdoor work and spent a lot of time in the mountains. I've never seen anything like this. Now, what I am saying now, I didn't say it at the time. I'm saying it now. I had a thought in my head. I had like a voice in my head that says I was looking at real owls at my feet. Both times, this voice was, I'd look at these owls, and I had this voice in my head that said, this has something to do with the UFOs. Now, what I didn't say earlier on is I had all the symptoms. Let's see, symptoms. That's the wrong word. I had certain life experiences, that's a better way to say it, that would imply or point to UFO contact. I had missing time. I had some close-up UFO sightings. And in 1993, when I was 30 years old, there was a bright light shining in the bedroom window. It was very unusual. And I sat up in bed, and out my window, backlit by a very bright light source, were 5 skinny gray aliens with the big black eyes and the big bald heads, and they were walking towards the house. And I should have been scared. It was a very strange sensation. I should have been scared. I heard a voice in my head that said, now is the time to shut down. And I put my head on the pillow, and I went to sleep. Now, so all those events, I have a handful more, but those are the most telling of the memories that I had. Those events were kind of simmering, and I knew I would have to look into those at some point in my life. And at that point in 2006, I was at the point when I needed to look into those experiences, and I knew it. But instead, I was denying it. I was pushing it away. I did not want to deal with what these events implied. After seeing the owls and that voice in my head, I started looking into it. I started contacting abduction researchers. I started contacting, and they would often put me in touch with other people who've had the contact experience. And I started networking and talking and researching, and mostly I was researching myself. And in doing so, because of these owl experiences, every person I would talk with, I would ask the question, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And it's certainly not 100%, but enough that there's a very clear pattern. People would say, that's funny. No one's ever asked me that. But yeah, I have had odd experiences with the owls. And I started collecting these stories. Now, eventually I started a blog. And one of the very first blog posts that I put on was that camping story with Kristen. It's just a nice story, seeing some owls in the mountains. Sure. After I posted it, it bugged me. I got back to her, and I asked exactly the question you asked me earlier. What was she talking about? And so it was 3 years later. I couldn't remember. And I was like, I got a hold of her. I said, Kristen, what were we talking about the very first night when we saw the very first owls? You were talking about something that that felt important. What were we talking about? She said, I remember exactly what I was talking about. And she said, I was trying to give my deepest, most heartfelt definition of what God meant to me. Now that took an already powerful set of events and turned it into this almost like transcendent moment for me. Now, I'm not at all churchy or anything like that, but I recognize the power in what she said. And I am not kidding. I spent I'm doing it now. I'm still here. It's now 12 years later. I have spent the last 12 years digging into exactly the question you asked me initially. What is the connection between UFOs and owls?
All right, we've got to take a break. Please stand by. Exonation. Mike Leland is our special guest this hour. He's the author of The Messengers. And if you'd like more information about Mike, his website is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. And Mike and I will be back after this short break as we continue here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Before we get back to our guest of this hour, Mike Leland, let me see. First of all, Ellie Marzulli has his new book out. It's available on the X Chronicles newspaper site. And Mac Maloney has a new book out entitled Mac Maloney's Haunted Universe. And for all the information on Mac Maloney, his book, his radio show, by the way, which is going to be on this network on the XZBN in the very near future, visit his website at macmaloney.com. I'm talking to Cleland. I'm talking to Mike Leland, and we're talking about his book this hour, The Messengers. His website is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. And before we went to the short break, we were talking about the question that I asked you about what you and your friend were talking about that night that you spent under the stars. And we're, the connection then with owls and other people who have had alien abduction experiences. How many people, have an owl connection?
Well, I mean, how many in the numbers? Now, like I'm not an objective researcher. I'm completely subjective. Mm-hmm. So if you Google UFOs and owls, someone's going to find me, mm-hmm. and so I'm now collecting these stories. So, like in my files, it's like that's my files consist of is people who've had this contact experience with, and then also have had owl sightings. So it's in my files, it's mm-hmm. dang near 100%. But that doesn't transfer over to like what another researcher who has a more wide
let's
view
just
of it.
Take a look at the basic alien abduction scenario as reported.
Okay, let's jump to half a step back. Here's a very common story. Friend of mine, he's become a friend since doing this. He's lying in the desert, looking up at the stars. He's camping, and him and his buddy look up, and at the top of this cactus is an owl. It's staring down at them in its nighttime, and they're like it's a little bit menacing. And it flies off, and a moment later, a triangle-shaped UFO flies right above where they're lying and proceeds across the landscape. I have this story in one form or another over and over and over and over. Yes, it's unusual to see an owl at night, but it's not impossible. No. It's very unusual to see a UFO at night, but those reports come in. To have those overlap over and over and over again is remarkable. Now, that's a very pedestrian sort of account that I just gave you. Some of them get extremely bizarre.
But I'm wondering why you're saying it's rare to see an owl at night when owls hunt at night.
Well, how often do you see an owl at night?
I go up to my daughter's cottage and I see them all the time.
Oh, good. Okay, so you're living in a place with a lot of owls. I live in a place in upstate New York where I hear more owls than I see.
Yeah.
So yes, but okay, here's an example of this. This woman she's in a large city in Brazil. She's in an apartment building. Mm-hmm. She's on her balcony, and she looks out over the city, and she sees this silvery craft flying above the city. She sees a flying saucer, and it's cruising along, and her eyes following it. And there's a building directly in front of her, and the skinny building and the flying saucer is zipping along, and it should just go behind the building and pop out the other side. And she says, it didn't pop out the other side, like disappeared, like it didn't come out. And she's kind of saying, all right, guys, where'd you go? What's up? At that moment, 2 owls come and land on her balcony, and they live there for a couple months.
Coincidence?
I'm at the point, no, it's not a coincidence. I'm at the point now where I've read so many of these accounts and talked to so many people and been in close contact, mostly through email, but often, phone calls and talking to people directly. It's not a coincidence. Something else is going on. What that something might be is a tricky thing to untangle. What I can say is that this pattern from my direct research and my direct experience is real. What it means, how it works, what it implies is something altogether different. But these events, there is a connection between owls and UFOs. What it might be is very elusive, but the connection is there.
All right, let me ask you this. I've been doing the show for 29 years. 4 shows a night, 4 hours a night. I do an internationally syndicated radio TV show. I publish newspapers. I've never heard of an owl and a UFO in the same story before. How come?
They're certainly in the same story. So they're in the book we trace back to Communion, which was published in 1987.
Whitley Strieber, okay.
Yep, Whitley Strieber's book, and on page I think it's page 27. I've footnoted this so many times. And there's an account, the very first abduction account that came into his what we call abduction now. He doesn't use the term abduction. What we popularly call abduction. He wakes up the next morning, had this bizarre experience. He has a memory of an owl on his windowsill. It was wintertime. It was Christmas Day. So it was the next day. It was December 26th when he woke up. Him and his wife, he said, there was an owl. Something weird happened last night. There was an owl on the windowsill. And he goes out there, and there was fresh snow, and there was no tracks or prints, or the snow was completely undisturbed. And that was very unsettling for him. So here we have the very first UFO abduction account that kind of took hold of the population. I mean, that book was a very widely read book.
Okay, so what's the connection with the owl?
All I can say is that I'm collecting stories.
No, I mean with this story that you're telling us from the book Communion. The guy wakes up Christmas morning. He has something to do with an owl. He goes outside. There's no proof of the owl.
But he has a memory of an owl.
All right. Dream.
So
who knows?
Now, yes, but why would he? So you talked to. I spoke with Bud Hopkins about this before he died. I've spoken with many UFO abduction researchers. This is. I say, do you have any owls? Do owls show up in your research? And they look at me and they say, oh yeah, we get owls all the time.
Could it be because owls have big eyes like the extraterrestrials are supposed to have?
That is the implication. So the story that emerges when you talk to the UFO abduction researcher, here's a typical story. People driving down the road at night, they turn a corner, there's a great big 4-foot tall owl in the road. It's very strange. They stop, they look at it, maybe they drive on. Oftentimes the owl can look over the hood of their car. They continue on, they get home, it's 2 hours late. They're missing 2 hours. So the implication there, and oftentimes if they go through hypnotic regression, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but it goes something like this. The hypnotherapist will say, describe the owl. And they'll say the owl is tall and skinny. It's about 4 feet tall. It's very skinny. It's bald. It has big black eyes and a little skinny spacesuit on, and I don't think it's an owl. So the implication is that the UFO occupants, most probably the skinny gray aliens that we've all come to recognize, are somehow using a screen projection, a projected hypnotic trance of some sort where they can put in an owl into the mind of the observer. I don't know how that works or why, but that certainly shows up repeatedly in the research.
But why an owl?
So there's one, you pegged one of very good reason that may be the answer, which is the owl has big black eyes.
I gave a possibility. I didn't give a reason.
Yes, you gave a possibility. Yes, one of the possibilities is that the UFO occupants are choosing that simply because they look like an owl. At the same time, deer show up in somewhat equal numbers in the screen memory aspect. Deer and owls are at the top of the list, and then there's a long list of other things after that show up as screen memories. But mostly it's deer and owls at the top of the list.
You know, regression hypnosis has been not proven to be accurate or correct. It's
I agree.
A matter of
It's messy.
It's a matter of interpretation. So how can we take anything that anyone says who has gone with regression hypnosis? Even Bud Hopkins' wife said that it was all a bunch of bunk.
Yes, and that, but at the same, so I'm sort of in the middle ground, right? So yes, you can be very cautious. I think it's a tool that can be used appropriately, and at the same time, so the Bud Hopkins, there's an illusion, I think, that Bud Hopkins, 100% of his research was based on hypnotic regression. That's simply not true. A lot of people have completely conscious memory of these experiences, and so yes, so I agree that the hypnosis is a messy business in the sense that it's easy to debunk. You're dealing with the subconscious. Nobody actually has a good working definition of what hypnosis actually is. I feel certain that people could be led astray under hypnosis, and perhaps the skill of the hypnotherapist improves that somewhat. But again, we're dealing with the subconscious. I don't know how that works, but so here's another story. This is back to the screen memory aspect. This is remembered entirely consciously. This woman was 19 years old at the time. She's now an adult. She was working at a girls' camp in the Cascades, North Cascades in Washington State, I think. And she was walking between two buildings. And there was kind of a path that went through the woods between these two buildings. She could hear the girls playing in the background, and she knew she had had contact experiences.
All right, we're going to take a break here. We're going to take a break because I do have to take my news. And when we come back, let's continue the story. Exonation, our guest this hour is Mike CLELLAND. And if you'd like to find out more about Mike, if you'd like to visit his website, it's hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. And we'll be back on the other side of the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget you can get your complimentary copy of the X Chronicles newspaper every day of the week, month, year, whenever you want, however you want, simply by going to xchroniclesnewspaper.com. I'll be back on the other side of this news break. Don't go away. And welcome back, one and all. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and our guest this hour is Mike CLELLAND. He's the author of The Messengers, and his website is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. Mike, before we went to the news, you had just started to tell us a story, and if I could get you to go back and start the story from the beginning, I'm sure the listeners would appreciate it.
Great. So this woman's a friend of mine. She's had a lot of experiences. She was 19 years old at the time. She was working at a summer camp for girls. She knew she had had contact experiences. She had fully conscious memory of basically aliens in her bedroom and lots of odd experiences. But it always happened at night. So she was working at the summer camp. She was walking between two buildings, a little path between the buildings. So she wasn't like way off in the woods alone. And she's walking on a little path. She can hear the girls playing in the background. And she turns a corner, and there, next to the path, in a little meadow, is a gray alien standing there. And it's full sunlight, full daylight. She sees this thing, and it sees her, and she sees it, and her senses gives her this look like, uh-oh, I'm busted. And then she hears this kind of, these beings seem to communicate completely telepathically. She hears this voice in her head, this kind of echoing, reverberating voice in her head that goes, owl, 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 owl. And she watches this gray alien morph into an owl, turn around, and run into the woods. so here's something that wasn't. There's no hypnosis here, and full daylight, and that I have that story a few times. Not so much with owls, but with other deer certainly. So the implication is that there's this, somehow she was, I don't understand what may have happened, but the owl itself, excuse me, the alien itself chose to camouflage itself as an owl, but there was some mistake. It was sloppy somehow. Go on.
I was just going to ask you, you said the owl ran into the woods. Why wouldn't it have flown?
Because it certainly didn't seem to be an owl. It certainly seemed to be a gray alien that was somehow masquerading as an owl.
Could we then use the same scenario and say that maybe the Mothman from the Mothman prophecy, who many described as looking like an owl, was actually an extraterrestrial?
I don't have an answer. That's certainly a good avenue of speculation, and it'd probably be fruitful that there's some connection between the Mothman, which was extremely large and had a very big wingspan, and the owls that are often reported as 4 feet tall.
Oh, I see.
So yes, I have no way of knowing, but that would be potentially an interesting avenue of speculation. Sure.
What is there in our ancient mythology that we could use as an example, or use as a scenario for why you are hearing about owls and UFO contact or alien abduction contact?
So earlier you asked me, you sort of said, perhaps the screen memory is related to the big black eyes.
Yeah.
That gets repeated over and over and over again in the literature. It's kind of a given among the UFO abduction researchers. I'm very cautious to take that as dogma.
Right.
The other avenue of thought is that they could be using the owl for more of an archetypal reason. There's ancient history all over the world's mythologies. The owl is associated with the night for obvious reasons.
Sure.
And the owl would then fly into the night, and then that became a metaphor in many of the world's traditions for traveling to other realms, traveling to the land of the gods, traveling to the land of the dead, traveling to the land of the ancient ancestors. The owl would then come back with a message. And that's probably where I got the title of the book,
Gotcha.
The Messengers, from this aspect of ancient mythology. Now, owls show up in other highly charged, what I refer to as highly charged events beyond just UFO contact. But my sense is that the owls are showing up more as a symbolic archetype, where somewhere deep in us, we have a deep inner knowing of the, let's say, the esoteric meaning of owl, right? You watch Star Wars, you see Luke Skywalker having all these adventures. You're seeing the archetype of the hero on the screen. You're caught up in the story and see the thrilling movie, but you're seeing the archetype of the hero. You're in the woods, you see an owl, you see a bird with big eyes. At the same time, you're seeing an archetype that touches us at a very deep level. What that archetypal meaning might be is very slippery, again, very elusive, but that is the best answer I've come up with for why they are choosing the owls and why the owl has now become the totem or the symbol of the UFO contact experience.
Where does synchronicity come in?
Well, synchronicity, okay, synchronicity, let me think of a good, so here's a fellow, he tells us, so synchronicity is a term coined by Carl Jung. And he has kind of a dry, long-winded definition of it. The simpler definition, it is a meaningful coincidence, a coincidence that is meaningful to the observer. Now, I'm not an academic. I'm an artist. I'm an illustrator, and I'm writing these books to help untangle my own UFO contact experiences. So I'm doing this for a very selfish reason. I'm not objective. I'm subjective. So for me, I went through a period at the same time I saw those owls with Kristen in the Mountains. The aftermath of that, I was seeing a lot of owls, and I was having a lot of synchronicities, and all those synchronicities tied into either owls or UFOs. And I spent a few years there, like, suffering. Like, I felt it was almost like I was questioning my sanity for a few years. Like, this stuff was happening so
hard and fast and so overwhelming. Where does synchronicity come in with it? Here, so this guy, he's a pseudonym. His name is Nathan. He's contacts me. He said, Mike, I had an experience. I hit an owl. I was driving through this town on my way to work. It was dark. This is in Oregon. He's driving through the town, and an owl hit his windshield. Bam, he killed it. And he said, you know what? 2 years ago, I hit an owl in the same town before dawn. It was the same time of year. Now, he went through and I looked at my email. He sent me an email 2 years earlier. I have it dated. Everything's there. He hit and killed an owl in this town before dawn. It was February. It was early February. I don't have the dates in front of me, but early February 2015 and 2017, 2 years apart. So here's a man who has had what I consider UFO contact experiences. And he's also seen a remarkable number of owls, including the 4-foot tall kind.
Oh, right. No, I'm sorry to cut you off here, but how did you jump to the conclusion that he had UFO experiences based on him just seeing owls?
Oh, no. I've had long conversations with him.
Oh, you didn't mention that.
We've had lots of talks about him and his experiences, yeah.
Well, what kind of experiences did he have?
Seeing UFOs, missing time, bloody noses, very, very strange synchronicities, orchestrated relationships, the kind of things that show up in the lore of the UFO experiencer. So here, let me jump back. So two experiences, and this is the definition of synchronicity. It is powerful to the observer. 2 weekends, Sunday mornings, early in February. They were both Super Bowl Sunday. Mm-hmm. You take the word Super Bowl, it spells out superb owl. Now, you could dismiss this right away, but I will tell you that this was powerful and meaningful to Nathan. It was a meaningful, powerful event for him to have that very strange bit of wordplay be connected with these experiences. Now, that's a very soft one, but you asked for an example of a synchronicity, and that's the first one that popped in my head. So synchronicities show up in connection. You go to a UFO support group meeting, right? And I've gone them. You sit around in circles, and a researcher is usually running it, and usually the researcher is a therapist of some kind. And you ask people in the room, like, have you had any odd experiences, like with synchronicity? And I feel that the people who've had the UFO contact experience have a higher amount of synchronicity than the norm. But I also feel that anyone on what I will call like a spiritual journey will have a higher number of synchronicities. So the implication is UFO contact somehow tied into a spiritual journey.
But isn't it also possible that the person who has a UFO experience has a much more active mind and prone to fantasy than the person who doesn't have the UFO experience? Because there are more people who do not have UFO experiences than those who claim UFO experiences and those who claim alien abductions.
Okay, I mean, I've talked to enough people who have seen close-up craft that they're telling very similar stories with very, very similar. I've been doing full-time UFO research for a decade now, and or nearly full-time.
All right, we've got to take our final break, so let's just hold it here. X-Zone Nation, our guest this hour is Mike CLELLAND, and if you'd like to find out more about Mike, his website is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. And Mike and I will be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Now, we will be moving our entire TV and broadcast facilities to Hawaii over the next couple of months. So all I want to say is that we've enjoyed being here in Hamilton since the last 29 years, Craig. But, it's time where we start enjoying life. My wife and I, when the children have left home. No, they've never been abducted by aliens. There were times when I wish they would be. But we're going to be moving everything to Hawaii, to the beautiful island of Maui. And as we get closer to the moving dates, we'll be telling each and every one of you how, who, what, when, where, why. But We'll still be here every night. Don't go away. Exonation, my guest this hour is Mike CLELLAND. And once again, if you'd like to find out more about Mike, his website is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com, and he is the author of The Messengers. Mike, the person or the people who have reported UFOs over the years seem to be flamboyant. They're very, they're prone to fantasy. They are always looking for something out there. And I can't understand why it's only a small number of people who are having these experiences, whether they're real or not, and why the majority of the population isn't. Especially now that statistics are showing that society is starting to lose interest in ufology, and this is being echoed by the decrease in UFO sightings being reported to both the National UFO Reporting Center as well as to Chris Rutowski in Canada. What do you think is going on here?
So I disagree with the fact that the UFO people who witness UFOs are somehow flamboyant, or the people who claim the abduction.
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly have met some flamboyant folks, and I would almost fall into that category myself. I'm an artist, and I kind of live on taught outdoor work and stuff like that. So I'm out of the societal norm in many ways. But I have certainly talked to lawyers and advertising executives and bankers and bus drivers and people completely on the mainstream of these experiences. And I'll tell you what, those people do not talk about it. They don't talk about it they talk to me.
Why would they talk to you? Why?
To me, but they don't talk about it to anyone else.
Why do they talk to you?
The flamboyant ones have nothing to lose, so they blurt the stuff out.
But
so I would argue that your assessment is... Oh, go on.
But why do they talk to you? Why do they share this?
Because I'm a UFO researcher.
Because you're a believer?
Pardon?
Because you're a believer?
Yes, because I'm a believer. And honestly, people need to be heard, right? So people, I don't care who that is, someone who's been through any kind of traumatic experience needs to be heard. They can go to a therapist and tell their story. Now, I've tried to go to a therapist and tell about my stories, and the therapist was not receptive to it. Let me tell you, I've talked to other people who are receptive, and it is a very powerful emotional thing to be in contact with someone where you can share these experiences.
But how come with all these experiences, there's never any physical evidence?
Oh, sometimes there is.
Where?
Sure. I mean, there's been the implants that have been removed. There's been burn marks in the yard.
Wait a sec. First of all, let's get back to the implants. Dr. Roger Lear, a podiatrist, and Daryl Sims, an alleged so-called spy with the CIA. Come on. Let's talk credibility here.
I don't have any issues with Roger Lear being a podiatrist. That's his job, is to remove, things from people's feet, right? So he's removes, bits of metal and nails and stuff like that. And so I can't. That's not my avenue of expertise. So all I would be doing is paraphrasing what I've read.
Where's the evidence?
Now, for me, the evidence is in the consistency of these stories. And I am on the outside edge of, there's like a mainstream of UFO abduction research, and I'm certainly on the outside edge where I'm looking at these more elusive aspects of the stories, these kind of outlying stories. And I'm not saying that the source of this is aliens from another planet.
Okay.
I'm saying that people are having real experiences. I don't know the source of these experiences. All I can say is these experiences are playing out in two ways. Let's say they're playing out in metaphoric ways, in kind of, I don't want to use the term dreamlike because that implies something else, but these events are showing up symbolically. And then at the same time, these events are showing up as something very real. People are, have had missing time. People have had close-up UFO sightings. We can put someone in the electric chair in America or whatever, I guess, whatever. Someone can be executed by witness testimony in America. But the same witness testimony
has to be based on evidence, not hearsay evidence.
Yes, but you can talk to the first person. You're not talking. It's not hearsay when someone says, "I have seen a UFO."
Where's your proof?
I don't have any. I mean, so where's my proof? So I have had several sightings with other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had sightings with other people.
Have you taken any photos?
I have not ever taken any photos of what I would consider a UFO now.
Why not?
This is with an era of cameras and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was 12-year-old boy when I had a joint sighting with a friend.
I see. Nothing recent.
Nothing recent that involved a camera.
All right.
No.
This is, when you look at the UFO phenomenon from the outside, my background as a police investigator, criminal investigator, I deal in proof. I deal in facts. I deal with evidence. I have not, to this day, seen any evidence that would substantiate any claim of a UFO from outer space.
And I'm not saying there's UFOs from outer space. I'm saying that there's unidentified flying objects that people are witnessing and documenting, and documenting in the sense that they're contacting me and telling me their stories, and I'm documenting their stories. So yes, I get exactly what you're saying. I am not a police investigator.
So what are they seeing, and what are they reporting?
I feel like I am playing the role of folklorist, right? So we have an emerging folklore, and I feel this folklore should be documented. I don't know. I cannot vouch for the veracity of anyone's experiences except my own.
So do you believe everyone who contacts you and tells you that they've seen a UFO or they've been abducted by an extraterrestrial?
I take them very seriously.
But do you believe them?
I'll tell you, let me just finish. I take them very seriously. I take their reports. I contact them. I have a back and forth exchange.
Right.
And then I look for similarities in other stories. Some people tell me some weird stuff. And yes, sometimes I'm very skeptical. If I see a pattern, you take one file and it sits there alone and it's a one-off.
Right.
There's not much I can do with that, right? So once I start to see a pattern, then I take it seriously. Now, once again, I am not a police investigator. I am an artist.
Right.
And I am dealing with what I consider an emerging folklore, an emerging modern mythology is taking place right now.
But you also said that you're a researcher, that you've spent the past decade researching this.
I have been immersed in it, yes. If you want to paint a picture of me as being obsessed creating
Wait
this
a sec, hold on here. As a researcher, do you not vet the information that is coming to you? Do you not vet the person who is telling you this information in order to see if the person, is there anything in his background that may shed light on what is being seen, heard, or reported? Or do you just take everything that he says and say, okay, fine, that's your story, I'm going to publish it?
So, yes, you've asked a very good question. I am one person. If you wanted to give me $1 million and I could have a staff of people to vet these folks, that would be wonderful. Presently, I'm getting many what I consider let's say intriguing reports, right? So I can't say whether they're credible or not. I'm getting several intriguing reports a day. Okay, you multiply that by a year, that's over 1,000 reports a year. I am like the smallest little researcher on the outskirts of this stuff.
Okay, but do all these reports have owls included in them?
Most of the ones I'm receiving do, yes. So
how many reports would you say in the year 2017 you received in total, and what percentage in that total would have an association or a synchronistic account with an owl?
Okay, so I'm just doing this off the top of my head.
Sure, I appreciate that, yeah.
Close to 1,000. And of that, 80% would have an owl. Or if you wanted an owl or synchronicity, it would be near 100%. So yes, here I am at the receiving end of what I am considering a new, modern. The way I frame it is folklore. right? So I can't frame it scientifically. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an investigator in the strict dogmatic way that your police experience would want to define an investigator as.
Sure.
I'm simply archiving these stories, sharing them, and telling the stories as best I can. So if someone says to me, like, listen, someone contacted me and said, I had an owl outside my window.
Uh-huh.
It shot a blue beam, a blue laser beam came from the stars, hit the owl, and then that blue beam hit me while I was lying in bed. Now, I have a couple stories like this, so that's not a one-off. All I can do is say, I heard this story. I'll report it. You know, I don't want to dwell on it, right? So it'll take, in a book, it takes a few paragraphs, and I'll compare it to the other stories like that. Yes, I recognize this is, and the person, I've talked to the person on the phone, the person seems credible. It is a credible person telling an incredible story.
All right, Mike, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We have to say so long for tonight, but X Zone Nation, you heard it here first on the X Zone. Owls and UFOs. Oh, I get it. That's because owls give a hoot. I don't know. The story seems like it's for the birds, if you ask me. And that's Craig's way of telling me that he agrees with me. All right, X Zone Nation, I'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.